What is going on, guys? Welcome back. Ryan Moody, Jimmy Smith, our MMA show. Jimmy, the thing that we communicate on here tells me how long it's been since we last recorded something, and it's been 9 days, believe it or not. It feels like longer, but
it feels like a lot longer.
It does. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but regardless, it's what happened. In that time, you selected Fighter of the Year, and you went with Jorge Masvidal. And there's no bad choice. Let me just be upfront with you. There's no bad choice. But I was really surprised by your choice of Jorge Masvidal. To me, and we never disagree, so the fact that we took this long tenure off and then now have a disagreement, a little bit weird, but I digress. I went back and I listened, and there was a fighter that neither of us were 100% sold on that actually became my Fighter of the Year. So let me set you up a little bit here. I'm going to go through Jorge's opponents, and I want you to tell me on a scale of 1 to 10 how great they are, and that if they would be a Hall of Famer in terms of fighting.
Sure.
Darren Till.
He's a solid 8 to me. Oh, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, let's say.
Hall of Famer?
No.
Ben Askren.
Between a 7 and an 8.
Hall of Famer?
No.
Nate Diaz.
Solid 7. Maybe an 8.
Hall of Famer?
I think he might be a Arturo Gatti Boxing Hall of Famer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but not consensus. You could make a case.
Right. You could make a case, but not a first ballot Hall of Fame shoe-in. Yeah.
Okay. So now, the dead giveaway. I'm going to go to who my Fighter of the Year for. Of course. Jose Aldo.
A 10 career-wise shoe-in Hall of Famer.
Max Holloway.
A 9.5, 10, probably a Hall of Famer.
I'll let you serve as the doing the honors here.
Right.
You have to know who it is.
Right,
yes,
of course.
yes.
Not a bad pick. Now, the difference, and you could say Volkanovski had a better year. Certainly possible. He beat better fighters. Certainly possible. The reason I put, and let me go through my logic and then we can discuss yours. If you had given me a list of candidates for Fighter of the Year at the beginning of 2018, or, let's say the end of 2018, beginning of 2019, and Jorge Masvidal was on that list, I would think it was a misprint. If you told me here are the 5 candidates for Fighter of the Year that will be Fighter of the Year at the end of 2019, and Jorge Masvidal's name was on that thing, I would have gone, huh? If you said Volkanovski is going to go on a great run and win the featherweight title, that doesn't sound out of the realm of possibility at all. Obviously, a talented fighter. He had positive momentum heading into 2019, for sure. Had a great run, and now he's champ. Israel Adesanya, same thing. Had a great 2019, but had a pretty good 2018. The reason to me Jorge Masvidal is Fighter of the Year is, at the end of 2018, this guy was on a 2-fight losing streak. He was a middle-of-the-road tweener between 155 and 170, bounced around, but no great accomplishments in either weight class. At the elite level, had never won more than 3 fights in a row. And if you told me he would be a pay-per-view seller, big money fighter, one of the biggest names in combat sports at the end of 2019, I would have laughed my ass off. So the reason he's my pick is not that he had a better year than Israel Adesanya or Volkanovski or Henry Cejudo. I don't think he fought and defeated the level of talent those guys defeated. It's that at the beginning of 2019, the end of 2018, any of those names were possibilities for Fighter of the Year 2019. All of those guys were. Masvidal wouldn't even have been on my radar for this award. Where he is compared to where he started the year is the reason he's my pick.
I'm glad you took that approach because
that's kind of how I see it. Yeah,
I'm hand in hand with you to a degree, but I would counter that with Jorge Masvidal. We had seen him fight elite competition before. the split decision with Damian Maia, Cerrone, Ellenberger. You can go way back to criminally underrated Cesar Ferreira. He had fought good talent.
You can go back to Strikeforce. You can go back to Bodog. He fought some Eve Edwards. He fought some great fighters throughout his career. Yeah.
I just don't see Volkanovski having done that. I mean, sure, Chad Mendes was great, but the Chad Mendes he fought was the final Chad Mendes in MMA. Darren Elkins, Jeremy Kennedy. There was really nothing there that made me look at him and say, hey, this guy, sure, he's got good wins, but this guy is going to go beat two of the all-time greats when I'm not going to give him the benefit of the doubt in either one. I just don't see it. I think that he lacks the highlight, right? We all know the Ben Askren highlight. I think he lacks that real big moment. He won 2 fights by decision. There's no real spark with that, but how many times can you look back at a fighter in a year and say he hands down beat 2 Hall of Famers? It does not happen all that often.
Yeah, pretty rare, especially the Holloway win. You could say Jose Aldo isn't the fighter he used to be, has slowed down a little bit, although that was a competitive fight. You can say that a lot. You didn't pick him. I didn't pick him. Almost no one I know picked him to beat Max Holloway. Not just beat Max Holloway. I thought he cleanly won that decision. I thought it was clearly his fight pretty much from beginning to end. That's an all-time great performance, period. If Volkanovski falls off a cliff performance-wise after this, he can still, that fight will live on in the annals of fight history as a great upset and a great performance.
Yeah, and I'm even more taken back by the fact that these were full fights, 3-rounder, 5-rounder, complete performances. You don't have that, I guess, fallback of, he lucked out. Like we talk about with Conor and Jose Aldo, there's always kind of that people that go back and say, he lucky shot, would never happen again. 1,000 times if that fight happens, maybe once again that could possibly take place. When you look back at the fights against Jose, who I will say I don't think was nearly as bad as people made him out to be, considering I literally think he just beat Marlon Moraes, different weight class, but still nevertheless, when you go back and look at those fights, he put on clinics against 2 guys that in neither case we gave him any real chance of doing it. And that's, I think, what turned the tide for me. I want to be surprised by somebody. I want to look at something and say, hey, I didn't expect that. And in this case, I saw it happen twice, and sure, maybe a little bit was emotion. I wanted Max to win. I wanted Jose to win. But in this case, you had a guy that really came out, didn't really break my heart, but in the same time, put on world-class performances against world-class opponents that hadn't really seen anybody. No offense to Darren Elkins or Chad Mendes, really hadn't seen anybody world-class before then, and comes out and just does a masterful job and wins a championship in the process.
That's true. Those are certainly the best names of his career by a lot. But you will agree with me that trajectory-wise, and I called his fight against Chad Mendes, trajectory-wise, Darren Elkins, I called that fight. Trajectory-wise, he was headed in the right direction at the end of 2018. When you said the short list of featherweight contenders, if you had an ounce of brains and an ounce of experience in MMA, Volkanovski would have been on that list at the end of 2018. Yes?
Yeah, no, I agree completely.
Right. So he hadn't beaten the greats yet, but his trajectory was up. He was a name to watch. He was someone to look at for sure. I think Israel Adesanya kind of in the same boat. We hadn't seen that great name yet, but eyes were on this kid. Much like Volkanovski's Israel Adesanya, they were heading in the right direction. When you look at Masvidal, at the end of 2018, it almost looked like, that might be it for his career. When you talk about the names he had fought, Masvidal had taken on top names, hadn't had great records against them. We thought, the MMA community thought, we had kind of seen what we were going to get out of Jorge Masvidal, right? We had kind of seen, this is, he can beat some good guys. He can beat some bad guys. Some big names beat him. We'll get good performances out of him. But almost in much the same way we look at Cowboy Cerrone as he's good. He's not great. Always exciting. Love his attitude. He'll never be the best of the best. I think that's where we thought Masvidal was at the end of 2018. And you could argue his streak wasn't as good as the fighters you just named, which is true. But it put him in a position I didn't think he was ever going to get to, where Conor McGregor wants to fight him. I didn't think we'd ever see that out of Masvidal.
I just want to look at this from a different perspective because I understand and agree with everything that you're saying, but I think one thing that gets overlooked in this conversation when anyone has it about Jorge Masvidal's year is a lot of it is just kind of circumstantial. You know, we can go back and with the same Conor Aldo argument say that flying knee maybe doesn't happen every single time they fight. Maybe doesn't happen every 10th or 1,000th or 100,000th time that they fight. It certainly was one of the greatest MMA moments, period, regardless of how you feel about Ben Askren. It was a great moment in MMA history. However, it put a lot of pieces into place in a fight that really wasn't that important. The Jorge Masvidal-Ben Askren fight wasn't anything that really was building to something massive. Now, the end result, having this incredible flying knee knockout, certainly generated a lot of interest even outside of the MMA bubble in which we live and created the context of the BMF belt, which, you know, again, we've kind of went back and forth on how we feel about it and created the fight against Nate. So to me, as far as what it means, there's a lot more novelty here than there is actual importance in winning a true championship. And again, I think when I go back and I have to make the decision between I love what both of them did, I guess, in hindsight, but what's more significant to me? And as an MMA purist, what's more significant is what Volkanovski did.
Yeah, it's true. But what's more unique is what Jorge Masvidal did. I've never, for all the reasons you're saying, it makes his 2019 so spectacular and weird and one of a kind. And I think the best win he had is the one he gets the least amount of credit for, which is Darren Till. I thought that was the best win of that streak. That had the most significance. Darren Till had just fought for a title. This was a striker who was naturally much bigger, and Masvidal knocked him out. As you said, maybe that flying knee against Ben Askren, that's a 1 in a million shot. He put everything behind it, and it worked. Great. But the idea that he went from where he was to where he is off of these crazy events, not just fights, but the crazy circumstances around it, made it kind of a magical year for him. And that's part of the reason he gets my vote is he kind of did it without going up the natural ladder that we all expected.
Not only that, I mean, you got to remember that Darren Till fight, which, as you said, I think it's glossed over so much. That was in England. That was set up for Darren Till. That was almost a showcase fight of, hey, listen, you're a high-level striker. Here's maybe not so much a high-level striker as much as a brawler. And like you said, Masvidal goes in with a lesser rank and just takes him out and literally almost puts Darren Till in a tailspin from a personal level, it appears, for a short period of time.
Yeah, and a bigger guy, a stronger guy. This guy, remember, Masvidal's comfortable at 155 pounds. You could argue that's where he's at his best. He went to 170 and knocked out a guy who's a decent-sized middleweight. That's impressive. That was the one I think that set him up. You could argue that the Ben Askren fight was kind of a step back in terms of contender status. And he blows away Ben Askren, and then the Nate Diaz fight, which gets the most press, I would argue the last two fights were certainly more difficult stylistically for him, and he was going to have more trouble with those guys. I think Nate was right up his alley, exactly the kind of fight he wanted. So it's kind of interesting how he gets the most press for the win that I think is stylistically the best matchup for him.
Either way, I think no matter who you look at, even if it's beyond these two, and like you mentioned Israel a couple times in there, no matter who you look at as far as fighter of the year or performance of the year, what we've talked about here is definitely things that can grow the sport, things that bring people to the sport. And overall, things are great for MMA, whether it's a flying knee knockout in a fight that brings a lot of casuals in when you talk about Diaz and McGregor, or you talk about a guy that kind of takes that old school approach of walking through two of the best to win a championship. And honestly, I think if we could look back and say, remove one of these storylines, it would mean undoubtedly, if there wasn't Volkanovski, probably you could easily say 10 out of 10 people are going to give this to Masvidal. If Masvidal doesn't have this incredible stretch, then a lot of people maybe look towards Israel, who again kind of followed that traditional upper echelon of going through fighters and winning championships, or Volkanovski. It just so happens, like you said, you kind of have this one really unique sequence of fights and a great personality going along with it. We didn't even really touch on the Leon Edwards thing, which kind of all came out of left field with this too, that really made for some unique moments in MMA this year.
Yeah, it's been a really great year for MMA. in general, of course, the ESPN deal, moving to that platform has been very, very important. But there weren't just great fights last year. There were a lot of great storylines. And when you talk about the Masvidal experience in 2019, a lot of it has been the storyline. A lot of it has been kind of the BMF build. A lot of it has been a lot of the crossover success that wasn't necessarily traditional. And it's a big part of the whole year. And I think Masvidal is at the forefront of that story.
Absolutely. And definitely look forward to everything that we had to talk about with these two guys and everyone else, for that matter, going forward. Other than that, we appreciate you guys checking this out, and we will be back very shortly with more comments.